Hello again and welcome back. Today we're picking up where we left off on this 1957 Austin-Healey 100-6. If you've not seen the prior video to this, this is a project car, and with any project, the key to success is actually getting work done. So today we're going to start on the floorboards here. We're going to try to get access to that front outrigger. I started cleaning up along the seams here to expose the little stitch welds along the side that hold this panel in place. I'm going to try to take it out in as few pieces as possible. And while I was doing that, you can tell, I'm not sure if the camera will pick it up, but this section here is bulged considerably. And the reason for that is underneath that outrigger has been completely mangled. I'm not sure if someone tried to pick it up with a hydraulic floor jack or something like that, and from it being rusted or whatever, it just couldn't support it anymore, but it is pretty significantly damaged. So we're going to get that exposed, try to get this floor section out of here. Again, we're going to be leaving the sills here in place, at least temporarily, while we get the riggers taken care of, just so they're kind of in there for reference and a little bit of structure while we start lining things up. We will be replacing those eventually as well. And then we're going to move on to this toe board up here. You can again see that old patch panel in there that's actually done pretty well. It's riveted all along the seam here, which I think is directly into the outrigger, and then it's just screwed there along the top to the old metal. I do have the patch for that, so we'll get that cleaned up and taken care of. We'll kind of get the patch in place, line it up as best we can, and then we'll start working on cutting out this outrigger and along that section. Now, as you noticed, I'm not really going through and bracing the inner body as I'm doing this. And that's because most of this car is just so far gone at this point that a lot of this stuff is not lined up to begin with. So we're just going to have to kind of deal with that as we get to it. Once we start getting to this back door structure here especially, and replacing this shut panel, we're going to have to do quite a bit in terms of lining everything up, getting our door gaps back. It's a bit tight there at the top. So for right now, I'm not really worried about that. So I'm going to fire up the old death wheel here, start cutting out those old welds, and try to get this floor piece removed. So it's always fun when the car has a little bit of hidden treasure buried in it. I pulled out the parcel shelf and found inside was a whole bunch of change just hidden underneath the carpet. Now the earliest goes back all the way to 1966, and it kind of goes through the years here nice and slowly until we get to the most recent. There's two in here from 1995. Now it's always fun finding stuff like this because it kind of just gives you a little backstory on the car, like when was the last time it was probably driven. I mean, if you're just moving this around your property or it's just sitting in the garage, chances are you're not throwing quarters in the parcel shelf. So somebody was probably driving it around at least in the mid-90s. So after what felt like an eternity of drilling out rivets, I was able to get this front toe board patch removed, and I want to get you in here and show you they did a fantastic job with repairing this. I mean, if you don't have a welder, this is one way of doing it where it adds rigidity, and as you can see, it's held up over time. So what they did, it looks like they'd cut out the original rotted out floor and even ground down the original stitch welds back here that would have been on the outrigger where the floor met up. And they got this all nice and clean so that the patch fit really well with it, and then it's riveted in along the outside edge here. You can kind of see the remaining holes of the rivets. They cut out the original rot. You can sort of see some of where they've cut it through there. I mean, it definitely kept creeping as it went and time went on, but they put in this backing plate that's still here, which is riveted in various places, that just added rigidity to this whole section. So when you had this layered in here with that backing panel together, and it sandwiched that original sheet metal in between the two of them, this whole section, I mean, it stood the test of time. That whole section was nice and solid. A really, really impressive patch. I mean, I've seen everything from just license plates with just self-tappers screwed into these things. I've seen the Maxwell House coffee cans cut up and slapped in here. You never know what you're going to find, so I was quite impressed. So continuing on, I've been coming along and grinding out the original stitches along this mid floor pan here. I've got the ones to do along the front there where it meets the outrigger, and I've also started making a cut here along the sill where I'll be able to pull this panel up, and I'll be able to assess this damage. Again, with how much this thing is bent up right here, it's going to be interesting because it makes me wonder if this outrigger has been pulled inwards towards the car. So we're going to probably have to do a lot of measuring insanity checking on that once we get this new outrigger in. But I'll get the death wheel out, get that going again, get this floor section out, and then I'll bring you back once we can see this outrigger. So now I've got the old outrigger cut out, and I left just a tiny little bit of the original box in place so I can get some measurements off of it. And it's usually easier if you cut them off, leaving a little bit behind, then grind it down to the frame. Otherwise, if you try to cut it flush, you can end up hitting your frame and gouging it quite a bit. Inside the box there is actually really solid. There's no rust, there's no rot there. Sometimes when you take these things off, you'll find that they're just rusted through where they've been closed off like that. Not the case here. If we go take a look at the outrigger itself, it is in pretty poor condition. Again, you can see that it looks like someone tried to jack it up or do something with it, or maybe they hit something with it, and it's pretty mangled on this side. There's a lot of rot and just crust that's fallen out of it. There's a lot of rust that's fallen out on my floor. So yeah, just completely shot. So I'm gonna take some measurements, grind down what remains of the box. I'll probably hit it with like some weld-through primer. Once it's cleaned up, I'll get the new one kind of lined up and mocked up in place. And then I'll probably come through and scrape off the weld-through primer where it's actually going to be welded in place, because I find that the weld-through primer doesn't make very good welds. So I started cleaning up the inner frame rail here, and as you can see, most of it cleaned up pretty nice. Looks like there's a bit of primer under there. There's a lot of kind of thick undercoating and just grime over the years that kept all this in shape here. There's a little bit of pitting along the top. Right here is probably the worst part of all of it. It does feel pretty solid in there. I'm going to get the poker out later and pick at this and see if it'll go through and make a hole, but otherwise most of it's not too bad. However, when we come down to the box itself, I had spoke too soon earlier. Once I clean that up, there is quite a bit of pitting in here. It's not so bad along the top, but along the bottom there, where earlier it kind of looked like there was a little bit of a bulge there. Once I cleared that out, sure enough, it was a pretty nice hole. So as you can see, things escalated pretty quickly. I ended up cutting out the entire section. The reason for that is if we take a look here, you can see it's pitted pretty badly. And I figure if I'm going to be putting in a patch down here, there's no reason to going small. I might as well do the entire thing. And it's pretty thin in some areas, so I figured I might as well just do it all. So I'm going to clean up the rest of my edges inside of there. Everything else looks pretty good around it. I need to figure out what kind of gauge metal this is that I need to make the patch out of. Then I'll create a template out of the piece I cut out and get the patch tacked in there, make sure it all fits nice and well. If everything's looking good, I'll just go ahead and weld that all in, grind it all down, get it looking all nice and new, and that'll just give me the peace of mind knowing that everything back there is taken care of, that this isn't just going to rear its ugly head again someday. So I'm going to go ahead and get started on that, and I'll probably pull you back in once I've got the replacement patch all tacked in, show you what that looks like, and then we'll continue from there. Alright, slowly making progress here. Got my patch tacked into place there. I'm going to come back through and weld that in completely here, then grind down the welds. It did take me a little bit of searching to find appropriate thickness for the steel here to make that patch. It seems like these sills were originally around like 1.6 millimeter, which I think ends up being around like 64 thousandths. So I had some 16 gauge, but that ended up being too thin. And luckily enough, I had ordered a bunch of just welding cards for practicing some welding on, and those were all in 1/16, which ended up being pretty close. So that's what I used to make that patch there. I'm gonna finish getting that all welded into place here, clean up the welds, and then we should be ready to move on to tacking the outrigger into place. So I've got my patch all welded up and everything ground down there. I didn't film any of that because I don't want anybody copying my bad habits. I am definitely not a welder. So there's many great videos out there on YouTube if you need any information on how to put patches in, that sort of thing. There's definitely better places to learn than from following me. So next up, I've got the outrigger here. I'm going to get this measured up and line it up, get it tacked into place. And I'm not worried about putting primer down just yet because the center of this thing is hollow, so I'm going to basically come back and spray down the inside of this, which will get all of this patch we put in there coated again. I might even drill a drain hole down at the bottom here where it, if any condensation or anything builds up, there will be some area where it can just kind of drain out instead of just being trapped in there. So I'm going to get that taken care of next. I'll bring you back in here once I've got everything all tacked up in place. Alright, I've got the new outrigger temporarily tacked into place here. It's in the exact same location as the original. I took a number of measurements before I cut the original one out of here. I also compared it to the one on the driver's side. I made sure that the top surface here is at the exact same angle as the frame itself. Over here, where it was originally welded to the sill, when I cut out the original outrigger, there were some remnants left of where it was all attached over there. Not much, but it left a little bit of a channel over there, and this one's fitting right back into that same channel very well. So I don't think I'll need to make any tweaks to that, but I am just going to leave it temporarily tacked for now. It's just easier cutting a few tacks rather than having to cut out the entire weld if you do need to make any adjustments. So next up is going to be attacking these sill assemblies. I'll have to assemble the new ones. I did measure these originals here. They're at about 1 inch and 30 thousandths in terms of width. So I'll make sure that when I assemble the new ones, they're the same way. A lot of people like to put a 1-inch square tube on the inside of these for additional support. I might do that as well. I'll just end up checking and measuring because I have the uprated sills already, just to make sure that it doesn't end up making this section a bit too wide. And so the way that these are assembled, I'll also show this again later when I assemble the new ones, is basically there's this outer piece here that's just a straight piece of metal, and it just folds over the top, and they're just kind of stitched in a number of places along the top. A lot of people will come through and just spot weld them on the top. And then at the bottom, the inside section here is essentially just a C-channel, but where it comes back together underneath here, it has a drop off as well, and that meets up with that outside assembly, and it's just spot welded. But on this one, it's all rusted out and gone, and that's why they installed that galvanized channel down here to basically provide where the original like rocker panel gets attached to, and that's what all these big screws are through here, is just where they've got that original rocker panel attached. So since it's going to be quite a bit of a can of worms, I'm probably going to end this video here, since there's going to be a lot to dig into with this. Getting these sills out of here. It's all boxed in around here, and I'm not quite sure how much of this toe board I want to cut out just yet. And this structure here, it's welded in along the top to the sill, but it also has its own drop off on the back side of that where it's spot welded to the outer portion of the sill assembly. And it's going to be a bit of a can of worms opening that up and seeing just how bad the rust is back there. So didn't quite make it as far as I'd hoped with this video, but I did make some progress. I'm happy that I got at least the new outrigger installed. Any tiny bit of progress is always better than none. So having at least one section or one piece done is always a plus. So the next video, we'll be taking the fender off. We'll look at how bad the rest of the rust is back here. We'll start taking off the rocker assembly here. We'll start making our way back towards the shut panel. And the goal will be to get this sill out of here, get the new one assembled, kind of just get it in place, start lining things up, see what kind of rust repairs we need to make. So the next video will be quite a bit more complicated because there's a lot more to get into trouble with. And I'm sure we're going to find a lot more rust. So that's going to do it for now. Thanks again for watching, and I hope to see you later.